All right, good morning. It's Thursday, and looks like it's going to be a good sunny day. And the Tamster's taking off to head to Atlanta, so I'm kind of by myself today. And I don't mind that too bad. I missed her, but we'll see what develops. So anyway, hope everything's going well in your world. Hope you had a great night last night and got some good rest and ready for the day. So listen, we are going to jump right on into the book of Acts today, and I'm really excited about what is taking place, and so we're following Paul on his journey, and here we see some vulnerability of Paul. There's a couple of phrases in this section, and if you miss it, you miss a lot of what's going on from an emotional perspective. I call this the frail side of Paul. Because we see that he's a little worn out, and he's afraid, which is not normally do you think of Paul and one being afraid, but yet that's what we find as we read through this text. So Paul has been on this intense journey of his second missionary. Now, you remember it started with a rift between he and Barnabas, and so there's that weighs in the back of a man's mind. You can be as tough on the outside as you want to, but when you love like Paul loves, friendships matter, and no matter the distance, no matter how the argument happened and they separated, there's no doubt that weighs in his mind. But he's got Silas. He heads up north, meets Timothy, brings him in. God had shut out two different places, a little discouraged because he's trying to hit two places, can't get there. Makes his way to Troas, sets sail because the Macedonian call, and that's a good thing to know. Hey man, God is calling you somewhere, right? So Paul's not just wandering around here. He's on a mission, and God's in it because he had this vision. So he lands in Europe, and at that point, it seems as though he was beaten and so many other things that tended to take place, and this is just a constant deal with him. And so he went from that city to others. Saw some fruit in some, but man, the Thessalonican Jews kept chastening everywhere he went. And so finally, Paul and Silas and Luke say, hey man, just get out of here. Just go. And so he heads down to Athens and walks in there, and we spent some time there. He's by himself, and he's ends up teaching in the Areopagus, which is kind of a tribunal area, and we find that he's just greatly discouraged, right? I mean, he's been beaten, he's been chased all over Europe, he's been scoffed at. They called him the scoundrel of tidbits, like he didn't really know much. But when he mentioned the resurrection, they had some curiosity, but they eventually kind of scoffed at that. Although there was one of the judges in the Areopagus came to Christ. And then there was a woman that came to Christ, but not a lot of fruit. So Paul moves on, and he finds his way into Corinth, and we know a lot about Corinth. He wrote two letters, actually three, but two that we have. He wrote to them. Corinth is on the west side of Athens, at the divide. So Greece is kind of divided into two areas, and Corinth kind of sits in the middle. And there was this little strait that you could kind of get through, which meant you could escape the Horn of Greece and not have to sail down through kind of treacherous waters to get to the Ionian Sea. So it was kind of a shot from the Aegean Sea over to the Ionian Sea, part of the Mediterranean, and actually kind of the Gulf of Corinth. But anyway, that's where he is. It's an international city. This is a prominent city. Well, Athens was known for its intellect and all of that. Corinth was a rival known for its immorality, right? So you've got the intellectual at Athens, and now you've got the immorality at Corinth. Corinth also had some games, much like the Olympic Games at later dates. The Acropolis is there, and the Acropolis is not to be confused with the Areopagus, but the Acropolis was this massive structure. Some thought it a fortress, but in reality, it was more than a fortress. It was a temple for Aphrodite. It was who is the sex goddess, right? And so it is a cesspool of sexual sin. She had in that temple 1,000 priestess, prostitutes, who would invade the city every day and just service their clients, so to speak. And so it was just this cesspool. It was anytime you find a city that's kind of on a major deal, it was a northwest area. If you were going from the northern area of Greece to the southern, you had to come that way. If you were going from the Aegean Sea over to more west, you had to go through there. And so because of that, there's a hub, and people are coming and going, and anywhere you have lots of travelers, you're going to have lots of prostitution, and so this was what was going on. And so here is where Paul ends up camping out longer than probably he stayed anywhere else. From Corinth, he will write back to the Thessalonians 2 letters to them, and then he will write a letter to Rome from Corinth. And so Paul arrives here, and he is just worn out. And so you say, well, how do we know that? Well, I'll give you some things in a minute. I do know in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 3, it says, I came to you in weakness, in fear, and in trembling. Now, it's easy to see that as like, oh, Paul was a humble man. No. Paul didn't come in humility, which creates those things. Paul came just worn, slap out, and fearful. And so we're going to see that develop in a minute. But let's just kind of read the story. We're just kind of getting an intro into this today. We'll keep flooding away. But it says after these events, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, right? So after he spoke in the Areopagus, and after there wasn't much fruit there other than there were some who believed, and then there was one of the judges there believed, and a woman, must have been a prominent woman for her name to have been there. And so he heads to Corinth. Now, what do you do, man, when you're just worn out and discouraged? Your friend, you got nobody. You've been traveling by yourself. You're just weary. It's 50 miles from Athens to Corinth. How he got there, I don't know. Whether it was he walked, whether it was a horse, which we know he had done before because of on the road to Damascus is how he got saved. Whether it was a chariot or however he got there, he's worn out. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to that place where you're just worn out and you're a little discouraged and a little fearful, right? So we go through seasons in life like that. There's no one. Listen, no matter how great their appearance and their personality, we all struggle, right? I mean, I'm like one of the most optimistic men that you'll probably ever meet, and I always see the upside of life. But there are times, man, when you just get a little worn out and you get a little discouraged. And I've been there several times. And it's like, God, are you there? I mean, what's going on? And so there's discouragement that happens. And that's not just for ministry, but it's prevalent among ministries. Suicide rate among pastors is really kind of an all-time high. It's just a treacherous kind of ministry. Satan assaults and people discouraged, and it's just, it can be frustrating at times, but so can life, right? So what I want us to see here as we kind of delve into this is what God does and how God operates when his people find themselves in that discouraged perspective. So it says, after these events, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, and a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he came to them, because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they worked together, for they were tent makers by trade. So here's where we find ourselves. Paul walks into the city, doesn't know a soul. Worn out, fearful, looking over his shoulder. Man, are the Thessalonians still, are those Jews still coming down at him? And he's just concerned, and he walks in, and there's some transients there, some refugees, so to speak, from Rome. Claudius, listen, the Jews have been hated forever, and Rome had been trying to get rid of the Jews. The emperor before Claudius tried, Tiberius, he didn't succeed. Claudius finally commands them all to leave, just get out of here. And so they just have to leave, and they go wherever they go. Rome's a good bit northwest of Corinth, and so they've made their way down to Corinth, a Roman colony. I guess if, once in Rome, right, I guess always a Roman. And so they find themselves down there. Now, all it says is that Aquila was a Jew. Some believe that he was already a believer here. How, I'm not sure, because apparently the gospel has gone to Rome because Paul was writing to Christians there, but Paul didn't go there. So I'm not sure how that happened, and haven't been able to dig down study wise enough to discern really where the church formed. But it's possible that Aquila and Priscilla were believers. We know they were mature because they we'll see later on in some of the other writings that they helped Apollos understand and grow in his faith. So these are seasoned believers, we assume. If not, they're what we would call God-fearing Jews, right? And so anyway, it says a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, and recently from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded them to leave. So they're there. They're tent makers. Literally, the word there is a leather maker. So because tents were made out of skin, right? They weren't just canvas or whatever. They were made out of skins. And so you'd be a leather worker. Actually, Paul was a tent maker, but he was a leather worker as well. So Paul's diving in this leather working deal. And so he meets Priscilla and Aquila. We don't know where he meets them, whether he meets them, they're making tents. He goes, hey, guess what? I make tents too. Or whether he had gone to one of the synagogues and they were in there. Don't know. But for whatever it was, God brought him friends. This is crucial. In Athens, he had none. Here, he's got a friend. And look what happened. And because they were the same trade, he stayed with them and they worked together, for they were tent makers by trade. So God supernaturally just gives friendship to those who are discouraged. And so he stays with them and he's working with them. Man, when you start looking for God, you see it everywhere. Paul walks into a town, doesn't know a soul. God leads him in a sovereign way to Priscilla and Aquila. They have a place for him to sleep. They have work for him to do, and immediately he finds himself a little bit of relief in that sense, because we know, if there's one thing we know about Paul, he was a hard worker. In fact, when he wrote to the Corinthian church later on and to the church of Thessalonica, he was like, hey man, I work night and day not to be a burden to any of you, right? I mean, I didn't eat the bread of any man, right? So he's saying, hey, listen, I'm not just this sleazebag who wants to come in here as charlatan, make money off the gospel. I'm here because I care about you, and I'm willing to work hard to see that happens. And so it says in verse 4, and Paul was reasoning in the synagogues every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. And so there he is, his normal deal. He's going into the synagogue on the Sabbath, and there he's just teaching. Now, we don't know how long he was. Realize he's going to be there for about a year and a half or so. But at this point, we just know that's what's going on. Now, verse 5, it says that, but when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. Now, so not only does God give him a place to stay and he gives him work, Silas and Timothy finally make their way there. Now, some say that they had met up somewhere, maybe in Athens, because at some point, Timothy ends up going back to Thessalonica. So whether they had a brief encounter or not, or he did that by letter, whatever happened, Timothy went back to Thessalonica and then makes their way back to Athens. We know that just from other passages of scriptures as we piece this stuff together. Makes their way into Corinth, and so now he's got not just Aquila and Priscilla. Now he's got Timothy and Silas, and Dr. Luke is with him, and so God has amassed a circle of friends and influence. Listen, man, when you're struggling and you're worn out and you're weary, you need friends. You don't need to just tough it out. You need friends. And so God provided for him new friends and new friends are always interesting because you can tell your story and they're not worn out with it. And they don't know all the baggage in you, and they're going to be a little more encouraging to you in that sense. And so he had that, and then he has Paul and Silas and Timothy and Luke come back. And so there's this reunion in that sense. So Paul's getting just a little more energy potentially out of this, because it says this, when he did that, then he devoted himself completely to the word. Like he quit making the tents, left that kind of stuff to whatever Timothy and Silas and their occupation was, and he just went back to completely to the word, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. So he's back with the Jews now, man, just testifying that Christ is who he says he is. Verse 6, but when they resisted and blasphemed, he shook out his garments and said to them, your blood's on your own hands. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Now, that's where God sent him ultimately. You wonder, was there a little fear? And why wasn't he already? I mean, he's going to the Gentiles. That's where he is. He's in the Jewish deal. But it seemed like even when a Gentile town, he would go to the synagogue first. Now, probably because that's where the commonality was. But you wonder if there's not a little bit of fear as well, because God told him he was going to be an apostle to the Gentiles. Yet it seems like, and there were Gentiles coming to faith. But I think here you see this, you see it click, and he's like, I'm done. I'm done. So not only when you're discouraged and everything, does God bring you friendships, but he also reminds you of your call. There's something about hard times that reminds you of what it is that you're supposed to do. This wasn't because Paul had an aha moment. This was born out of frustration. You keep slamming your head against a rock trying to get in one direction. You finally realize, okay, maybe God doesn't want me going that way, so I'm going a different way. And you and I should consider those things too. So it says, but when they resisted and blasphemed, man, he shook out his garments. Now that's a melodramatic way which those people had this emotional aspect like that, animated. And he goes, hey man, your blood's on your own hand. Listen, if you don't want to hear it, that's fine. I've told you all I know. You don't want to, you reject it, I'm moving on. Right? And so that's where he is. And then it says, he left the synagogue, went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next door to the synagogue. So he did see some converts. Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, who lived next door to the synagogue, so they had become friends. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, believed the Lord together with his entire household, and many of the Corinthians, as they listened to Paul, were believing and being baptized. Paul's now seeing fruit. Man, there's something about getting aligned with God, and you see the fruit that's beginning to take place. And so you snatch out the leader of the synagogue. You got the man next door. Then it says many believers are there, and they're getting baptized. So there's this encouragement that takes place, right? And you see that developing. And then it says this, and this is what's the powerful part of it. So Paul's seeing fruit. Now listen, he came in discouraged, worn out, tired, probably still bruised from everything that happened in Thessalonica, and so he's just weary. Rolls into Corinth, worn out, fearful, trembling, weak. God gives him a couple that just kind of loves on him, cares for him, gives him work. His old friends reunite with him, and that shoots another form of encouragement into him. He gets frustrated in ministry. But yet, so he goes, hey, I'm done with trying to convert that. But yet at the same time, he's seeing fruit of his ministry. He's seeing, man, there's nothing like seeing fruit of our work. You know, I mean, Jeremiah never saw anybody come to love Jehovah in the Old Testament. He was called the weeping prophet. So there are those who suffer and they never see that kind of thing. But God was privileged Paul to be able to see that. Now, we get to verse 9, and this is what draws me into all of this, and we'll leave it at that. It says, and the Lord said to Paul by a vision at night, do not be afraid any longer. Now, what does that tell you? That he was afraid, right? That Paul was fearful. I'm sure he walks into town and goes, man, here it goes again. You know, I believe, and this is just my conjecture, Paul probably had some PTSD, right? I mean, we can... I think when he walks in and he's weak and he's timid and he's fearful, there's some post-traumatic stress disorder that's taken place in his life. You can't get those things out of your head. People have left you. You've been beaten up. People have rejected your message. You're just being as faithful as you can, and all this is going on. And I love what God does. God himself meets him there. So God encourages him in several ways, with new friends, with old friends, with seeing fruit of his labor. And then God meets him in a vision at night and says, don't be afraid any longer. Go on speaking and don't be silent. Listen, I know you're thinking about quitting, but don't. You keep speaking. Don't you be silent. For I am with you, and no one will attack you or harm you, for I have many people in this city. Isn't that amazing? Come on, I love that. And so here's Paul. Man, he's seen a little bit of stuff, but he's still a little timid, a little fearful. All that going on, weak, worn out. That's what he said, right? I came to you in weakness and fear and in trembling. That's what he said. I'm literally trembling, man, and I'm in fear and I'm weak. And yet all of this good stuff happens, and then just the cherry on top, the Spirit, the God Himself gives him a vision and says, "Hey, man, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Not any longer. You don't need to. You go on speaking and do not be silent. You keep doing what you're doing. I got a lot of friends in this city. Now, what that means, no, I don't know. I don't know if it means I have a lot of people in the city I need you to bring to faith in me, or I got a lot of people in the city who are watching out for you, but whatever it is, man, when God encourages you like that, you're going to be all right. And so what does he say in verse 11? And he settled there for a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. He goes, finally, I can just rest for a minute. The Lord said, I'm all right. So then he just hunkers down and he's there and he's doing his deal. Man, isn't that encouraging to know that when you and I find the frailty of life, God is right there to meet our needs? I needed that today, and I'm grateful for that message. Lord bless you guys. I can't wait to share with you some more what's happening in Corinth in the morning. Lord bless you, and I'll see you then.